do select a set of tools that you're going to roll out to your team, do vendor assessments, do security assessments, but then roll those out to your users, train them to use them, and then be clear about what you're responsible for as a central organization and what they're responsible for as the user.
Welcome to the Chief AI Officer or CAIO Podcast, where AI mentor Sanjay Puri talks with the leaders shaping tomorrow's technology. We explore their stories, challenges, and big ideas driving change. So if you're curious about how AI is transforming work, business, and everyday life, this is your front row seat to the future. Today, we're joined by Steve Wilson, Chief AI and Product Officer at Exabeam. From shaping Java in its early days to driving AI innovation in cybersecurity, Steve's career spans tech leadership, authorship, and even a black belt in Taekwondo. So let's dive right in.
So, Steve, welcome to the Chief AI Officers Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sanjay. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Steve, we have a global audience. Our audience is made up of your peers. It's made up of AI enthusiasts, AI entrepreneurs, AI policy leaders, and people who are looking to be in your kind of role. So, before we dive into AI, cybersecurity, and all those other great things, why don't we start a little bit about your personal journey? Tell us a little bit about how you got to this role, and how what were the influences, just briefly, and some experiences that have shaped the past, just very briefly.
I started my first AI company with some friends when I graduated from college in the early 1990s. And at the time, we were doing a little bit with neural networks and with genetic algorithms. Uh, then, somewhere around 1995, 96, somebody invented the World Wide Web, and it was pretty clear that we needed to go figure out the internet. So I set aside AI for a while and didn't really come back to it till the 20 teens. But when ChatGPT came out, like everyone, it really focused a lot of energy on that. Working in cybersecurity as I was in 2022, 2023, I got really interested in the cybersecurity implications of this new technology, and I founded a group at the OWASP Foundation, which is an open source group dedicated to building secure software, where we did some of the early research and how to build secure AI systems. And I wrote the first draft of a document that's called the OWASP Top 10 for large language models, which has become quite popular in terms of helping people understand um, those technologies. I wrote a book for O'Reilly called The Developer's Playbook for Large Language Model Security. And when I joined Exabeam a couple of years ago, Exabeam is a company that's been using machine learning for 10 years to do cybersecurity. I joined to lead product development. Um, but actually, earlier this year, it became clear that as much AI as we were using in our products, we weren't using it in our company. And so they asked me to take on an additional role as the first chief AI officer at the company and lead our internal rollout. And, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I've been working on projects to accelerate all areas of the business, including product development and engineering, but also use cases in sales and marketing and elsewhere.
Basically, you're talking about agentic AI. You talked a little bit in terms of what happens with rogue agents, etc., the insider threats. How should chief AI officers think about monitoring and governing their AI workforce alongside their human workforce?
It's been remarkable how much consciousness there is about the security risks of these new technologies built on large language models, generative AI, agentic AI, whatever buzzword you want to apply to it in the given time frame. There are some common risks associated with that. We see these names; they're scary. They're prompt injection and hallucinations and um, all those kinds of things. But fundamentally, a lot of it comes down to understanding the technology, which we needed to do in any of these environments. So when we made these shifts to the internet and the web, we had to learn something about network security. When we made these shifts to mobile, we had to learn something about the new concerns with carrying these things around in mobile devices. So a lot of people have been getting better educated on the security risks, but the basics of, in general, these are cloud services. We need to think about what data we put into them. As chief AI officers, we probably need to partner with our chief information officers, our chief information security officers. We need to figure out what our policy is going to be for these things. And I've worked with a lot of CISOs in figuring out their strategy and crafting their policies. And we often see people coming at this from an angle of trying to um, really regulate these things to address a lot of these concerns. Um, but you can do it to a point where you completely stop people from being able to use these in ways that are going to impact the business. And so you have to strike that balance. And there's some ways to do that um, that actually simplify the whole discussion.
Okay. The other thing that a lot of your peers, chief AI officers of very large companies, talk about in our podcast, Steve, is the issue of return on investments. And you recently wrote in an article in Forbes about companies spending billions on AI without seeing returns. How, as a chief AI officer, would you avoid the AI theater trap and ensure that your initiatives are delivering measurable business value?
It's a great question, and I'm sure if folks out there are chief AI officers or on that path, you've probably seen the publication recently that came out of MIT that stated that 95% of the AI projects that have been rolled out the last few years have not been successful. And when I look at this and I look into it, I think part of the reason is not about the technology itself. It's that these projects never could have been successful. People have been focused on the technology and not the outcome. The popularity of AI grew so rapidly that there was a rush to roll it out. It's like people were worried about getting left behind the same way that a company got left behind in the internet boom. And you don't want to become the next Blockbuster Video or Sears Roebuck that becomes a memory. So they say, I got to roll this out. I got to get everybody using Chat GPT. I've got to buy Microsoft Copilot. I have to do something. But I think when you do use these things, you realize they're powerful, and so you assume if I give everybody really powerful tools that it will make my business better, but it doesn't. And if you look at the use cases, will people be able to write better emails if you give them AI tools? Maybe. Um, but is that going to impact my business? I think another way to look at it is, will they be able to do parts of their job faster? Probably can. But are you measuring the number of times someone can do an act, or are you measuring the business results of it? And so I'd say the first thing you need to do is you need to think about, if I'm going to be able to measure a return on investment from one of these AI projects, I need to decide what the KPI is. What am I going to measure that's going to determine that success? And to the extent that I can get more pointed about the outcome that I want to achieve and how that's going to impact my business, then I can look at how to use the AI technology to optimize that. And so, when I think about my own business, one of the first projects that we tackled outside of software development, I'm sure we'll talk more about software development, but outside of software development was actually our own sales exception process. And when we looked at it, it was complicated. It was slowing deals. A deal might fall out of a quarter because there were all of these kind of manual checks and manual approvals. And as all these deals are coming in at the end of the quarter, we simply couldn't get these things processed. And we looked at it and we said, hey, could I change the game with some AI and make this better? And I could look at the time it took to process these and what's this costing me. And then I could look at a project to identify that, look at the solution, and measure the success of that. And what that's allowed us to do is unlock so many of these projects where we look at this now. And so we have released some what I'll call broad-based tools that everyone in the company has access to that we've secured and blessed so that people can use AI for almost anything they can think of. And I call that our horizontal use cases. But the ones that are going to pay off in terms of changing the business are what I might term vertical use cases, which are going to be ones where I have very pointed things that I've identified that are going to change the way we do business. And those are the ones where you can invest, spend the time, and then figure out that you can measure the success and see how that's going to impact your business.
So, Steve, let me just take a little issue with that because we've had tens of your peers come in on this show. And the one question I ask them is, what's your message to your peers? And almost to uh, almost all of them is, do it and do it now, and don't wait, because there is no waiting in terms of using this technology. And it should be bottoms up and it should be top down. Well, it is bottoms up because your employees, whether you know it or not, are using this technology. So the question is that, what do you say to these organizations who are saying that we need to do it and do it fast, and who are seeing some real productivity gains? I mean, you are seeing a consistent reduction in workforce across companies. Now, they can phrase it however they want, but AI has a lot to do with that. Now, you can call it productivity gains or whatever it is. So, the question I have for you is, you talk about use cases. How do you pick use cases? You talked about you use, I think, vertical use cases versus horizontal use cases. So if you, to some of your peers who are listening, how should they pick use cases? And what you're saying is, be careful in terms of how, and think and plan for how you would use, I don't take LLMs or take agentic AI. What would be your message to some of your peers here?
So, if you are a chief AI officer, I'm sure you're inclined to be leaned in and say, we got to do this and we got to do this fast. You got this job because you believe in the vision. And I certainly do. But to use a sports metaphor, and I like Formula One. One of the old drivers used to say, "Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast." And if you're on a racetrack and you're in a hurry, you're not going to take the fastest path around the racetrack. Being in a hurry is not a way to get results. And I think when we go back and look at that MIT study, what they are showing is a lot of people have been in a hurry to get this done. They spent the money, they rolled it out, they did it without clear objectives. And so they were quick, but they weren't smooth. They weren't well thought out. They didn't have the objectives and they didn't get around the track, right? They crashed partway through. So I'm not the one telling you don't roll out AI. What I am suggesting is that just spending money to roll out AI and give tools to your workforce, they will not all figure out by themselves how to get better. When you look at the companies that are making these broad based statements of, I'm reducing workforce, it's not broad based. They're not saying I'm cutting 10% out of every function because I am more efficient. They're saying something like, I am cutting the number of technical support representatives I have because I've made tech support better. They are saying I'm removing uh, parts of my sales team because I've sped up parts of the sales process. Those go towards those very targeted, very measurable objectives. And so that is what I'm saying there. I I stand by my statement. You don't want to be Blockbuster. You don't want to be Sears Roebuck. You don't want to be the guy that didn't roll it out. But I think what we will see with this generation is people who spent billions rolling it out, got no payback, and still wound up being those ones left by the side of the road.
The other question that really keeps your peers up at night is governance. And you talked about the shift from human in the loop to human on the loop for AI systems. How should your peers structure their organizations and governance for this new paradigm?
I'm gonna build up, and we'll talk about things like human in the loop, human on the loop, because that's getting to some things that are at the limit case of as we roll out agents aggressively. But when I think about governance, the first thing I do think about is how do we build effective policies? And as I mentioned earlier, we've been through this and we've watched generations of these policies come out. And the first version of these policies generally said, "Don't do anything." Um, I've seen these policies that say you may not use company data with AI tools. And it's like, well, at that point, how am I going to do anything that's going to impact the business if I can't use the business's data? So I work at a cybersecurity company. I get it. We don't want our data going into random applications that we don't understand, that we don't own. So, from a governance perspective, let me quickly give you the principles, which is do select a set of tools that you're going to roll out to your team, do vendor assessments, do security assessments, but then roll those out to your users, train them to use them, and then be clear about what you're responsible for as a central organization and what they're responsible for as the user. And I think when we do see these things like risk of hallucinations and all these other things, I've seen policies that say things like, you must label any output that came from an AI. It's like, look, we all know 90% of what we're doing is probably coming out of AIs as we get to the limit case. What am I going to do? Put at the bottom of every email, I used an AI to write this? No, you're not going to do that. Um, the key thing is to flip the script and flip the bit. And when you create these policies to reinforce to your employees that these are tools, the AI is not responsible for the data that it gave you. You are responsible for your work output. And this is another piece of tooling, the same way that it was with the internet. And we had to teach people early on that you can't trust everything you read on the internet. This was not the same as getting something out of a book that had been edited and vetted, because there's a lot of stuff on the internet that's not accurate and not true. This is another twist on that. And so you need to think differently about that. How do you screen that? How do you bless it? But if you can put your employees in the mindset that they are responsible for that work product and give them some tools and training about how to do that effectively, then you empower them and you keep your organization safe. Um, Going back to that human in the loop, human on the loop, this is the shift that we've seen that's much different in 2025 than 23 and 24. 23 and 24, we were dealing with chatbots. People still use chatbots every day. It's the predominant way to use this. But now we are, for the first time, seeing the true rollouts of these agents. And we really saw them first in software engineering, where we gave these things broad-based access to tooling. And we see these standards like Model Context Protocol and MCP servers, but with the software development agents went the fastest because we simply gave them access to the command lines, so they can do virtually anything. But one of the things we see in those tools is um, the first thing that they want to do to keep you safe is make you approve every single action. They're like, I'm going to create this file. Is that okay? Push yes. Um, the productivity hit there is immense. When we see this from a cybersecurity perspective, we tell people like, hey, have humans in the loop. I often talk to people about examples like Hal from 2001, who turned off the life support system and killed his crew with no human in the loop. If the human had to approve him turning off the life support system, they would all still be alive. So that's great. But as we really move to this agentic space, these agents are going to move faster than the humans. There's going to be more of them than the humans. And so, my group at OWASP, when we're researching the agentic threats and how those are different from simply the large language model threats, one of the threats that they've come up with is they're simply going to do what we call in security, they're going to denial of service attack your humans who are in the loop. Your agents can respond to lots and lots of requests. If I can make lots of requests and there's a human trying to approve every one of them, at some point the human gives up looking at them and simply approves everything. And at some point you'll exhaust them and you'll stop the business. So, what we do see is certain industries that are looking at mission critical, safety critical uses of, software to automate these processes. And we see these what today are fringe use cases, but I think they do set the direction. We see different use cases in military uses of AI technology, right? There's one camp that is pursuing, I'm going to create fighter jets that can fly themselves, that can fire missiles themselves. And somebody's going to say, I saw the movie Terminator. I don't want to allow it to shoot those missiles without a human in the loop. On the other hand, there's another camp developing these technologies that's developing using strategies they call things like loyal wingmen. And the idea is you still have a human pilot, but that pilot isn't controlling every plane. That pilot is a wing leader, that pilot is a squadron leader, and he is commanding a set of drones that are around him. So he doesn't approve every action, he is leading the charge. And that's where we shift from human in the loop, for example, approving every time that the drone deploys a piece of ordnance, to human on the loop, which means it is continuously in this command cycle. And I think that's what we're going to see is some of these shifts. We're seeing that more and more in the software development agents, where we're taking away these individual small micro approvals and moving to larger places where things like um, code reviews and other code inspections are happening on a regular basis, where the developer is still responsible for the code, but not for the approval of every microscopic action that goes on. So I think we're going to see those models as we roll out agentics into more and more spaces.
How critical is agent identity management for enterprise deployments, and how should CIOs prioritize this? So, basically, one question is about just the managing these digital workers for a chief AI officer, and the other thing is about uh, the identity management and how should you prioritize them.
The first thing, we go back to that example with the fighter jet. That sounds exotic, science fiction. I've got this pilot commanding a squadron of AI fighter jets. But let's bring it back to something like software development agents. I often tell people, I mean, there's so much concern in the software development community about, will I have a job? I just got this software engineering degree. Does anybody need me anymore? Um, they do. Trust me. I used to be a professional software developer. At some point, I moved into management, and they took away my keys to the repository. I've used the AI agents to reclaim this, and I'm loving it. I'm loving being able to build software again, because I can keep up with all the new technologies. But I've seen what they're good at and what they're not good at. And the fact is, they need supervision. And when we talk about them as interns, they do the kind of things that interns do. As you tell them to do something, they kind of understand it. Maybe they did it right, maybe they did it wrong, or maybe they even knew they did it wrong, but they just got tired and scared and wanted to tell you that they were done. because that's what inexperienced workers do. And we see this all the time in the agents where they will tell you, I've completed the task. And then you go look at it and you're like, but you didn't. The tests didn't pass. And it said, you're right. I cut a corner. I will go back and do this. And so what happens is more and more we see the really effective software engineers, the ones that are getting the 10x boost in their performance, are shifting from writing every line of code to becoming team leaders. They're not using one agent to write more code, they're creating teams of agents. And this is one of the things about the way that we've built these artificial intelligences is these were all built by game players. You go look at Demis, who runs DeepMind at Google and who won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for AI. He was a child chess prodigy. And if you look at the development of all those technologies over there, it was gameplay from chess to go to StarCraft. Every one of these AIs is built on an adversarial, micro optimized framework to achieve a single goal. And you can redefine that goal for the task that you're doing, but they are all goal seeking beasts. And they try to achieve those goals very aggressively. And we've trained them and reward them only for achieving those goals. We saw a study come out of OpenAI really recently where they actually, we've all kind of known it, but they went and really studied it and proved it that said, look, why do these things hallucinate so often? Because the training process of reinforcement learning with human feedback, which is the big breakthrough that enabled ChatGPT. Um, we have these humans that evaluate two outputs, and one of them says, I don't know, and the other one guesses. You want to know what statistically got rewarded by those humans? The guesses. And so all these things guess, they take leaps. Um, so that is where right now these humans need to be leads. They need to do that. The other thing is one of the reasons you build teams is these things are objective seekers, but you can define the objectives. So when I'm developing software, I build virtual teams. I have one that writes code and one that writes tests because these AIs are not good at keeping two goals in their head. So if I tell it, you have to write the code and write the tests, it'll often pick, I need to write the code and it won't do a great job on the tests or it will skip them. If I create two of them, I can actually create this kind of adversarial framework that these things are built on. And so those kinds of things really, really indicate the role of the human in this more and more is that we'll become team leaders, and you'll have mixes of humans and virtual team members.
So it'll be virtual team members. Who should they report up to, Steve? To the CAIO, to the project leads? Your peers want to know.
When I do say virtual team members, I think it's really unclear to me whether they belong on an org chart or not. I think sometimes these things will literally be ephemeral, and I think we need to be careful about giving them first and last names and permissions and pictures that we put in the org chart, and people have experimented with that, and there's some negative reaction to that. The fact is, when I talk about these teams, I may define some of these teams and they exist for a day or two to accomplish a specific task, and so I have a framework that I can use to create an agent that goes after problems. At some point, its brain gets full. I blow it away and I create a new one. I think, though, from a security and governance perspective, these are a lot of the things that we're struggling with right now to figure out, which is, do I give those agents credentials or do I let them use mine? This is what we see. There's a couple different models. If you look at software development and you look at something like Claude Code, which is incredibly popular, Claude Code runs on my laptops with my credentials. So there's virtually no way to distinguish it between it and me. Sometimes it will label its work, like when it's doing something committing to GitHub, it will sort of put my name and its name on it so that you know that I'm using Claude. On the other hand, if you go and look at something like Devin, which is another one of these tools, Devin wants to be its own thing. It's like, give me a workspace, give me a VM. I'm going to live in here for a long time, and you just send me tickets, and I'll do work. I don't think we've necessarily figured out the right models for these things in the long term. But what I will tell you from a governance perspective is there's one rule I give everybody today, which is from a cybersecurity perspective, treat these agents like insider threats. There's often an idea that we want to treat them like applications, that we want to treat them like the non human identities of the past, like a laptop or a server. They are not that. They are much more self driven, they are much more aggressive. Um, and actually much easier to deceive and hack and hijack. And what that means is that's more like humans. And so when we do talk about these exotic vulnerabilities like prompt injection, there are other security vulnerabilities. If you're a cybersecurity person, you know things like SQL injection, which is something we've struggled with to control for years, but we know how to fix it. Prompt injection isn't like that. It's like phishing. And phishing is something we all take training on it every year. You know why we take training on it every year? Because there are no 100% reliable cybersecurity tools to stop it. And that's where we are with prompt injection, and that's where we are with agents. And so we need to continuously monitor their behaviors. We need to understand their normal patterns. When they get out of normal, we need to be able to detect that. And so looking at these with the tools that you use to look at insider threats, where you have maybe a disgruntled employee or a set of compromised credentials where someone lost their passwords and are being impersonated. Those are more the techniques we need to apply going forward to secure the agent population.
We had Claudio, who's the chief AI officer of Zscaler, on for a few weeks ago. He called them rogue agents. So he educated me at least on the dangers of those. Uh, Steve, just shifting to another question that's come in from your peers is there is, since O1 was launched, there has been a continuous evolution of different models, and not just by OpenAI, but Gemini. You got, right now we're in ChatGPT 5, we have Grok, etc. How uh, can your peers evaluate, and what kind of decision matrix can they use to pick the right model, or is there a right model? Because there's somebody's new on the leaderboard almost every few weeks or every week, it seems to be. So what matrix do you use, just briefly, for your peers? That was a question that came in for you.
It's kind of a wonderful thing about the competitive situation that we have today is that we do have a new leader all the time. There's nobody who's run away with this. And I don't think we're likely to see that in the near future. From a just raw model perspective, we'll have somebody come up with a leap like O1 as, adding reasoning was clearly a leap, but quickly everybody jumped on that. So I would say when you look at models, you want to be looking at the advancement in technologies, but within a family, like within GPT or within Gemini, I think as software developers, we have to be very careful with how we pick models because there are very different cost profiles to them, performance profiles to them. So at Exabeam, we use Gemini inside Vertex AI, which is Google's framework for doing this inside GCP. We're very careful about our cost and performance, and we pick models very specifically. Um, but the cool thing is, even though we've partnered with Google on this, um, if I want to try other models with their Vertex framework, it's easy to swap them in and out. And I think that's one of the things that we see. So, from a model perspective, the choices are not that interesting. Go pick the different things that you want. I think what is a little bit more important from a chief AI officer point of view is think about the ecosystem that you want to live in. And those are a little more differentiated and those are a little harder to switch. So when you think about, hey, I want to roll out AI so that everybody in my org can use it, I probably am making a choice. Am I going to roll out as my central framework? Am I going to roll out Microsoft Copilot? Am I going to roll out enterprise Chat GPT? Am I going to roll out Google Agent Space? And those, what we see is the tooling around them is more important than the model. The models are going to continue to rapidly evolve, and they'll get new reasoning capabilities, and they'll get faster, and all of that. But the tooling around them is what people will use. And if you look at something like Agent Space, it has some very unique things. It includes Notebook LM, which is a really unique feature to Google, which people get really excited about when they see. If you look at Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, if you're using Teams, it's integrated into Teams in these ways that's amazing. And you get these amazing meeting summaries and all sorts of other things. And so there you are forced to make some choices, but they aren't so much about the quality of the model or the rapid evolution of the model. It's about the integration of the tools into the ecosystem. And those are the ones that are going to have the big impact on productivity. And those are the ones that you probably need to evaluate, because when rolling those out will have cost, training your employees will have cost, and you'll have switching costs.
It seems like the LLMs or whatever you call it might be replacing a lot of these things, because now when you go in for search or even some of these things, and you kind of they're becoming a one-stop shop, and some of these people are going to go into applications. So very briefly, what does it mean for a chief AI officer? What does it mean for security from your perspective?
One of the applications that I haven't totally replaced, but that I replaced a lot of the use cases for first was a surprising one, which was it was simply Excel. And I've been a spreadsheet power user since I got my first copy of Excel in 1985. As a teenager. Um, but when I was doing some of these projects, I would take in a bunch of raw data, and then I could spend hours or days creating pivot tables and manually assembling things and copy and pasting them and getting them into the right state to do data analysis. And it's kind of fun for a person like me. Some of us are nerds that way, right? Um, at some point, I realized I could take all that data and I could just drag it into Chat GPT, and I could ask it questions. And, originally they called this thing like Code Evaluator or something. It had a name as a tool, but now it's kind of the thing. You ask it a question, it'll write a Python program to understand it. It will create charts, it will pivot around it, and it does this all in seconds, what used to take me days. So it started to just change the way that I work. I think what we see now is, even if you listen to Satya at Microsoft, I don't think some of these applications get replaced, but their user interfaces certainly will. And when I think about the way that we use a lot of these SaaS applications, we've spent the last 25, 30 years building glorified web pages around our applications. And that's the way we've learned to interact. And I find it ironic that Figma just went public. Figma's the tool that people use to design web pages for applications. They went public at a massive valuation. I would short that stock if I did things like that, because I think we're going to build less and less web pages. And I think what we're seeing now, certainly seeing this at Exabeam, is I've told people stop building new surfaces for things that don't need new surfaces. Just have the agents do the work, interface it through the agents. And so if I do look at what we're doing internally, we've deployed an internal set of AI tools that have chatbot agentic interfaces, and people can create their own agents. But one of the things that we did was we took Salesforce and Confluence and SharePoint, and we plumbed those all into the back in secure, blessed ways, so that now I can't get rid of Salesforce because it's my system of record for all of my customer data. But people are going to Salesforce less and less. And when they go to ask it questions the old way, you go and create complicated queries and sort through multiple pages of data. And now you simply ask the agent what you want to find out. So it's changing the nature of those interactions. The back ends of these applications will be more durable. I don't expect every SaaS company to go out of business, but I expect it to change our relationship with all of them dramatically.
Which is the biggest AI security blind spot?
I think it is simply the fact that hallucinations are a security risk if you don't mitigate them.
One essential chief AI officer skill.
Partnering with your CISO.
Future of SOCs, Steve?
A security operations center, more and more automation, using your bots to fight the bots that the hackers have.
Steve, open source versus proprietary, what would you go for?
Experiment liberally, use carefully.
Which is the biggest AI talent gap, according to you, Steve?
People don't understand how these things work.
What is the most promising agent framework? We talked about MCP and things of that nature. Which one do you think is the most promising agent framework? Is it MCP?
MCP is dominant right now. Everybody's rolling it out. It's got to evolve dramatically or it will get supplanted. Still TBD though.
Prompt injection solution. Do you have one in mind?
Prompt injection is an unsolved problem. Monitor your systems carefully and don't give bots data that you are afraid they might leak.
AI model evaluation priority.
Evaluating models is overrated.
Most important AI metric according to you?
How does it change your business?
Future of CISOs. Let's see. There are CISOs listening to you. Let's see how you get out of this one, Steve.
I do not think that we're automating the CISO's job. I do see CISOs themselves using more and more AI and it actually helping them get back closer to the actual security operations of their teams.
One of the things that we do, and I talk to you about this, is democratizing AI talent, where talent should float beyond the Magnificent Seven. What do you look for? Because this is also a plug for people to, look at your company from, an opportunity. What do you look for when you look for AI talent or AI skills? Just tell our listeners very briefly on that.
Okay. There are 3 buckets of AI talent and they're radically different. And if you don't differentiate between them, you're going to be in trouble. We look at these things where Mark Zuckerberg is paying $100 million for people with AI talents. It's for a handful of people building large language models. Most of our companies are never going to do that. Don't worry about that talent. You don't have to know how to build a large language model. Step 2 is how do I build applications that include large language models? So how do I add AI features to my apps? That is a specific skill set. I'm going to target that for a very small percentage of my applications. The next one simply is how do I effectively use AI? You don't hire for that. You train for it.
The hardest part of scaling AI responsibly in large organizations.
What you're going to find is a lot of your peers are way less enthusiastic about AI than you are, and you got to get that through your head, and you have to understand their fears and concerns and not dismiss them, but work through them.
An emerging area of AI research, Steve, that you're most excited about?
The most important area is alignment. And that the simple definition there is how do we ensure that the AIs are doing what we want them to do?
Well, thank you, Steve. That was Steve Wilson, a true pioneer at the crossroads of AI and cybersecurity. His story is a true testament of how innovation and discipline can shape an industry's future. I hope all of you have learned about, cybersecurity, about agentic, about rogue agents from this discussion. There's so much more that we have to talk about with Steve. We'll probably have him come back again. Steve, thank you so much for being on the CAIO podcast.
Hey, Sanjay. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Chief AI Officer podcast with Sanjay Puri. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you thought. And share it with someone curious about the future of AI. Join us every Friday right here on the CAIO Podcast as we share more stories and insights from the leaders shaping what's ahead.